Oh, we're going to get started with the last section in Chapter 8, which is solving rational equations. We're going to be combining what we've been working on in the last two sections with adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And this section, however, is going to be equations, so that there's going to be the two sides for these versus the expressions in the last two sections. So for this first example, we have x divided by x minus 3 plus x divided by x plus 3 equals 2 divided by x squared minus 9. Now, just like the last two sections, the first step needs to be go through and factor everything that you can factor. So neither of these factor, but down here, this x squared minus 9 does factor, so we want to go ahead and factor it. So we're going to just leave the first two alone. And then we want to go ahead and factor this. So it's the difference between two perfect squares, so we get x plus 3 and x minus 3. Now from here, we want to look across the denominators, and we want to find that least common denominator. And we want to multiply everything by the least common denominator. So notice we have an x minus 3 here, so that's going to be part of it. We have an x plus 3 here, so that's going to be part of it. And then both of these is an x plus 3 and an x minus 3. So we need one x minus 3 and one x plus 3. So we're going to write that as our least common denominator, an x minus 3 and an x plus 3. And we're going to distribute and multiply that by each of the terms. So I ended up rewriting it right next to each, this first term, this middle one, and this last term. So we're going to distribute that to all of them. And what you're going to notice happens, we're going to cancel out these denominators, so we have no more denominators to make this equation easier to solve. So in this first term, the x minus 3's cancel out, so we have this x times this x plus 3 left over. So we're going to bring that down. This next one, the x plus 3's now cancel out, so we have this x and this x minus 3 left over. Now this last one, the x minus 3's cancel, the x plus 3's cancel, so we just have this 2 left over. So now we're left with this equation. We have no more denominators left over. That's good. That now we want to solve for x. So we distribute this x, so we have x times x is x squared, x times 3 is 3x, x times x is x squared, x times negative 3 is negative 3x equals 2. We want to combine our like terms. So the 3x minus 3x cancels out. 1x squared plus 1x squared is 2x squared, and then equals 2. We want to keep solving for this x, so divide both sides by 2. Those cancel out, so we get x squared equals 1. And then how we undo to the second power, we take the square root of both sides. So we take the square root of both sides. Those cancel out, so we get x equals the square root of 1, which is just 1. And we need that plus or minus sign there. Because this was to the second degree, we know we're going to have two solutions. So we have x equals positive 1 and x equals negative 1. Now we want to make sure that anything that has been in the denominator, we want to still set equal to 0 to give us our restrictions. So x cannot equal positive 3 and x cannot equal negative 3. And the reason that is important to still look at our restrictions is because if any of our solutions end up being one of our restrictions, then that cannot be a solution. So for both of these, though, the positive 1 and negative 1 work. So let's try another equation. So we have x minus 1 divided by x squared plus 3x plus 2 plus 2x divided by x plus 2 equals x minus 1 divided by x plus 1. We want to go through and start factoring everything, as always our first step. And so the only thing that factors is that x squared plus 3x plus 2. So we want to see what multiplies to our a times our c, what multiplies to 2 but adds up to 3. So we have then a 2 and a 1, and we make both of those positive. So we're going to go through and factor this, and then we want to be thinking, what is our least common denominator? So notice how we have an x plus 1 and an x plus 2, so we put those. We already have an x plus 2, so that's good, and we already have an x plus 1, so that is good. So we're basically taking one of everything that is in the denominator, and we make that as our least common denominator. And then we want to go ahead and multiply this, distribute it to each of the terms. So I rewrote that next to each of the terms. And then anything that is the same on top and bottom, we can start canceling out. So the x plus 1's are the same, the x plus 2's are the same, so we just have this x minus 1 that we bring down. This x plus 2 is the same, so we cancel that out, and then we bring 2x times x plus 1 down. This one, the x plus 1's cancel, so we have this x minus 1, and then this x plus 2 left over. And then we have no more denominators, so that makes the equation already look tons easier. Now we want to start solving for our x. So let's start distributing here. So 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times 1 is 2x. And we just brought down this x minus 1 in front. And then over here, we want to go ahead and FOIL this. So x times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. Now distribute this negative 1. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Now we want to start combining like terms. So on the left-hand side, we have 2x squared. 2x plus 1x is 3x. And then bring down the negative 1. On the right-hand side, we have 2x minus 1x is just 1x. And then the other two terms, just bring them down. Now we want to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to move my x squared over to the left-hand side to make still my x squared term positive. So then minus my x squared, so those cancel out, minus my x, so those cancel out, and add my 2, so those cancel out. I want to get it all set equal to 0. So 2x squared minus 1x squared is 1x squared. 3x minus 1x is 2x. Negative 1 plus 2 is just positive 1. So I get it set equal to 0, and then I have some options. I can either, on this problem, use the quadratic formula, or I can factor it and then set them equal to 0, or I can go ahead and graph this parabola and see where it crosses the x-axis. So I'm going to go ahead and factor it, but you can choose whichever method you would like to. So this one I'm taking my a times my c, which is 1. So I need to figure out what multiplies to 1 but adds up to 2. So 1 and 1 is my combination, and they both need to be positive. So my factors are x plus 1 times x plus 1 equals 0. I set them equal to 0 and I solve for them, and I get negative 1 and negative 1. So my solution is x equals negative 1. And then I want to go back and look at my denominator. Any of the factors in the denominator, I want to set them equal to 0 and solve for them. So I'd get negative 1 here, negative 2 here, a negative 2 here, and a negative 1 here. So x cannot equal negative 1, and x cannot equal negative 2. Notice my restriction is one of my solutions. So then this x equals negative 1 cannot be a solution because it is part of the restrictions. So this one is just no solution. Alrighty, now this next problem, we want to start off going through and factoring everything. The only thing that factors is up here. So we want to see a times our c, what multiplies to negative 3 but adds up to 2. So for this one, we would have the combinations that multiply to 3 are just 1 and 3. Has to add up to 2, so positive 3 and a negative 1. So we go ahead and factor that. And then from there, we want to multiply everything by the least common denominator, which is the only thing in the denominator as x plus 2. So we're going to multiply everything by x plus 2. So I rewrote that over here and over here, so then we can start canceling things out. So the x plus 2 cancel, so we just have this x minus 1 on the left-hand side equals, and then these x plus 2's cancel out, so then we bring both of these terms down. Now we are left with this equation. We want to go ahead and solve for our x. So we distribute the x over here, so x times x is x squared, x times negative 1 is negative 1x. Distribute the 3, so we have 3 times x is 3x, 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. Now we want to start setting it equal to 0, moving everything to one side and combining like terms. So first off, negative 1x plus 3x is positive 2x. Now my x squared term is positive over here, so I'm going to move everything to the right to keep it positive. So I'm going to subtract my x over and add my 1 over. So when I subtract my x over, these cancel out. When I add my 1 over, these cancel out, so I just get 0. Then bring down my x squared. 2x minus 1x is 1x. Negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. And then from here, I want to either factor it, use the quadratic formula, or graph it and see where it crosses the x-axis. So I'm going to try by factoring. So I need to see my a times my c, what multiplies to negative 2 but adds up to 1. So negative 2 but adds up to 1. So I'd have a positive 2 and a negative 1. And then I set those equal to 0 to solve for them. So I get a positive 1 and a negative 2 when I set them equal and solve for them. So those are my solutions. I go and set my denominators equal to 0 and solve for them. to get my restriction. So I get negative 2 here and a negative 2 here. So x cannot equal negative 2. So then I can cross that out. So my only solution on this problem would be x equals 1. The other one cannot work. My last problem, I have 2 divided by x plus 2 plus x divided by x minus 2 equals 1. Nothing factors, so I want to go ahead and find my greatest common factor. So I have an x plus 1 here in the denominator, so I make that part of my least common denominator. I have an x minus 2, so I make that part of my least common denominator. And here I don't have anything, so I don't have to worry about this one. So I'm going to make that x plus 2 times x minus 2 as my least common denominator, and I'm going to distribute that to each of the terms. And then I'm going to cancel out what cancels. So I have the x plus 2's cancel, so I have 2 times x minus 2 left over. Bring down the plus sign. The x minus 2's cancel out, so x times x plus 2 is left over equals, nothing cancels out here, so I have just x plus 2 times x minus 2. Now I'm going to go through and start simplifying. So distribute here, 2 times x is 2x, 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. X times x is x squared, x times 2 is 2x. Over here I need to FOIL. So x times x is x squared, x times negative 2 is negative 2x. Distribute the 2, so 2 times x is 2x, 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Now I want to start combining like terms, getting everything set equal to 0. So on the left-hand side, I have 2x plus 2x is 4x. Everything else just bring down. On the right-hand side, the middle terms cancel out. They're opposite, so I just have x squared minus 4. Now from here, I want to start combining my x squared. So when I subtract my x squared on both sides, notice they cancel out on both sides. And then from there, if I try to combine my negative 4's and I add 4 on both sides, those cancel out also. So then I'm just left with this 4x, so I bring that down. Over here, everything cancels out, so I just get 0. So I have 4x equals 0. So I want to solve that equation, divide both sides by 4. My 4's cancel out, so I get x equals 0. I'm going to go back up and set both of my denominators equal to 0 to get my restrictions. So I get negative 2 here, I get positive 2 here, so x cannot equal positive 2 or negative 2, which is not one of my solutions, so x equals 0 is my final solution.